The dust devil swept across the empty stretch of Montana grassland, just as Owen Clarke reined his horse to a halt outside Rawhide, a settlement that seemed to exist more as an afterthought than an actual town. And that was when he saw her standing in front of the mercantile with her skirts whipping in the wind and something inside his chest, pulled tight like a rope around a calf. It was early September of 1877, and Owen had been riding for the better part of 6 years, since the war had ended and left him without routes or reason to stay anywhere particular. He had worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, hired his gun for protection details through Wyoming, and spent a winter in Colorado mining silver that never materialized into anything more than frozen fingers and dashed hopes. The Montana Territory had called to him with promises of work on the expanding ranches, but in truth, he had stopped believing that any place would ever feel like more than a temporary stop. The woman was struggling with a crate that appeared far too heavy for her frame, though she possessed a determined set to her shoulders that suggested she would sooner collapse than ask for help. Her dark hair had come partly loose from its pins, falling in waves against a face that showed both youth and a kind of weariness that came from carrying burdens alone. Owen found himself dismounting before his mind had fully registered the decision. "Madam, let me help you with that," he said, already reaching for the crate. She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and for a moment something passed between them that Owen could not name but felt in every part of his body. Then her expression shuttered closed, suspicion replacing whatever had been there before. "I can manage," she said, her voice carrying an accent he could not quite place. Eastern, perhaps, but softened by time spent elsewhere. "I do not doubt it," Owen replied, keeping his tone gentle, "but there is no prize for doing everything the hard way when help is offered freely." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his worn leather vest, the revolver at his hip, the dust that covered him from hat to boots. He must have passed whatever test she was conducting because she stepped back and gestured to the crate. "Then I thank you for your kindness, Mr. Clarke, Owen Clarke, just passing through and looking for work." "Passing through," she repeated, and something in her tone suggested those words meant something specific to her. "Everyone is always just passing through." Owen lifted the crate, surprised by its weight. Books, he realized from the way the contents shifted. "Where would you like this?" "The boarding house, just down the street. The building with the blue door." He fell into step beside her, leading his horse with one hand while balancing the crate against his hip. The town of Rawhide consisted of perhaps 20 buildings stretched along a single main street, with a few scattered homes visible on the outskirts. A saloon, a mercantile, a smithy, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left, and what appeared to be a combined bank and land office. The boarding house stood at the far end, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but maintained a certain dignity in its faded paint and clean windows. "I am Victoria Kennedy," she said as they walked. "I run the boarding house. My father established it 8 years ago when the town was first founded, but he passed last winter." "I am sorry for your loss." She nodded, accepting his condolence without false protestations. "It has been difficult, managing alone. The town is not large enough to support much business, and many of the men who stay here are—" She paused, searching for diplomatic words. "Rough," Owen supplied. "That is one way of putting it." She glanced at him sidelong. "You wear a gun. Most men do out here. You wear it like you know how to use it." Owen could not argue with that observation. "I have never drawn on a man who did not draw on me first, Miss Kennedy. I am no hired killer if that is what concerns you." "Mrs. Kennedy," she corrected quietly, "though I am a widow now. My husband died 3 years ago." They had reached the boarding house, and Owen felt an unexpected disappointment that their conversation was ending. He wanted to know more about this woman who ran a boarding house alone in a rough Montana town, who ordered crates of books, and whose eyes held shadows that matched his own. Victoria opened the door and led him inside to a small parlor that was surprisingly refined. Lace curtains hung in the windows, and the furniture, though worn, was polished to a shine. Books lined a shelf along one wall, and a piano stood in the corner, its wood gleaming in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. "You can set it there by the shelf," she said, indicating the spot. Owen placed the crate down carefully and straightened, removing his hat. "It is a fine place you have here. Thank you. I try to maintain some standards of civilization." She moved to a small desk and opened a drawer, withdrawing a few coins. "For your trouble. I would not take your money for carrying a crate 20 yards. Then you are unusual among men in this town." She returned the coins to the drawer and closed it with a decisive click. "Are you truly looking for work, Mr. Clarke?" "I am. There is a ranch about 5 miles north of here, the Running Creek Ranch. Marcus Thornton owns it. He has been looking for men who know cattle and can handle themselves. The winter range wars have made ranching here more dangerous than it should be." Range wars. Victoria moved to the window, looking out at the street. "There are sheep ranchers moving into the territory. The cattle ranchers believe they will ruin the grazing land. There have been incidents, fences cut, livestock killed. A man was shot last month, though no one was ever charged. The law here is—" She trailed off. "Sparse," Owen offered. "We have a sheriff, Tom Brennan, but he is one man overseeing a territory larger than some eastern states. He does what he can, but mostly people solve their own problems for good or ill." Owen turned his hat in his hands, watching her profile as she gazed out the window. Sunlight caught in her dark hair, illuminating threads of deep auburn he had not noticed before. "And you, Mrs. Kennedy, have you had problems?" She turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Why would I? A woman alone, running a business in a town where, by your own admission, the men can be rough. It seems a situation that might invite unwanted attention." For a moment he thought she would deflect again, but then her shoulders sagged slightly. "There is a man, Samuel Price. He owns the saloon and a few other properties in town. He has been pressuring me to sell him the boarding house. His offers have become more insistent as my refusals have continued." "Has he threatened you?" "Not in words that could be proven, but his meaning is clear enough." Owen felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the kind that had gotten him into trouble more than once over the years. He had never been able to abide bullies, particularly those who preyed on women. "That is not right. Many things in this world are not right, Mr. Clarke. We endure them nonetheless." She straightened her spine, visibly gathering her composure. "But I should not burden you with my troubles. You have your own path to follow, and as you said, you are just passing through." Those words again. Owen realized that she was protecting herself, keeping him at a distance because she expected him to leave just as everyone else apparently did. The thought bothered him more than it should have, given that he had known her for all of 20 minutes. "Perhaps I will stay a while," he heard himself say. "See what opportunities Montana has to offer." Victoria's eyes met his, and he saw hope flicker there before she suppressed it. "The boarding house has rooms available if you need a place to stay while you look for work. What are your rates?" $2 a week, meals included, breakfast at dawn, supper at sundown. That seems more than fair." She led him upstairs to a small room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a chair, and a window that looked out over the grassland stretching toward distant mountains. The room was clean and simply furnished, and Owen had stayed in far worse places during his wandering years. "I will need payment in advance," Victoria said, her tone businesslike though her hands twisted nervously in her skirts. Owen counted out the coins from his saddlebag and placed them in her palm. Her fingers were calloused, he noticed, the hands of someone who worked hard. When she closed her hand around the money, her relief was palpable. "Thank you, Mr. Clarke. Supper is in 3 hours. There is water in the pitcher if you wish to wash off the trail dust." She left quickly, pulling the door closed behind her, and Owen sat down on the bed with the realization that something fundamental had just shifted in his life. He had intended to ride through Rawhide, perhaps stay one night, and continue north toward the larger ranches. Instead, he had just committed to a week, and if he was honest with himself, he was already thinking in terms of months. He had spent 6 years drifting because nothing had called to him strongly enough to stop. He had convinced himself that he preferred the freedom of movement, the absence of ties and obligations. But looking into Victoria Kennedy's storm-colored eyes had shaken something loose inside him. Some understanding that he had not been running toward freedom, but away from the fear of settling down only to lose everything again, as he had lost so much in the war. Owen stripped off his shirt and washed his face and arms in the basin, watching the water turn brown with dust. Through the thin walls, he could hear the sounds of the house settling, footsteps on the floor below, a door closing somewhere. Ordinary sounds that somehow felt like music. He changed into a cleaner shirt and went back downstairs, intending to see to his horse. Victoria was in the kitchen, visible through an open doorway, her sleeves rolled up as she worked over a stove. She had pinned her hair back up properly, though a few rebellious strands still escaped around her face. He watched her for a moment, noting the efficient grace of her movements, before heading out to tend to his mount. The small stable behind the boarding house had 3 stalls, 2 of them empty. Owen unsaddled his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, and rubbed her down thoroughly before measuring out feed and hay. He checked her hooves and found a stone lodged in the left front one, which he removed carefully. The simple routine of caring for his horse settled his mind, giving him time to think. He had not lied to Victoria about never drawing first, but he had killed 3 men in his 24 years, and those deaths sat heavy on his soul even though each had been in clear self-defense. The war had given him his fill of violence, and he had hoped that moving west would put that behind him. But the West had its own violence, its own harsh realities. A man needed to be able to protect himself and those who depended on him. The question was whether Victoria Kennedy would become someone who depended on him, and whether he wanted that responsibility, except that framing it as a question felt dishonest. He already knew the answer. From the moment he had seen her struggling with that crate, some part of him had recognized her as someone worth staying for. When he returned to the house, he found 2 other men in the parlor. One was a grizzled fellow in his 50s with the weathered face of a long-time ranch hand. The other was younger, perhaps 30, with a nervous energy that manifested in constant small movements. "You must be the new resident," the older man said, extending a hand. "Name is Dutch Miller. This here is Carl Hansen. We have been staying here about 2 months. Owen shook both their hands. "Owen Clarke, just arrived today. Looking for work?" Dutch asked. "Planning to ride out to the Running Creek Ranch tomorrow." "Good outfit," Dutch said, nodding approval. "Thornton is fair, pays decent. I work there myself, actually. Just prefer to stay in town rather than the bunkhouse." "Getting too old for that much company." Carl said nothing, just studied Owen with eyes that missed very little. There was something predatory in his gaze that Owen did not particularly like, but he kept his expression neutral. "Supper," Victoria called from the dining room, and they filed in to find the table set with simple but generous portions. Beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, butter, and dried apple pie for dessert. Owen could not remember the last time he had eaten a meal that was not prepared over a campfire or gulped down at a dusty trail town eatery. Victoria served them, and then sat at the far end of the table, eating her own portion in small, precise bites. The conversation was minimal, which seemed to suit everyone. Dutch talked briefly about some trouble with wolves getting into the Running Creek cattle, and Carl mentioned that he would be leaving at the end of the week. Found work down in Virginia City, Carl said. Mining outfit looking for security. You will be missed, Victoria said politely, though Owen suspected she would not miss him at all. After supper, Dutch retired to his room claiming an early start in the morning. Carl lingered in the parlor, smoking a thin cigar and watching as Victoria began clearing the table. Owen helped her carry dishes to the kitchen, ignoring her protests. You are a paying guest, Mr. Clarke. You should not be doing my work. My mother raised me to help with cleaning up after meals. Old habits die hard. That earned him a small smile, the first he had seen from her, and it transformed her face from pretty to genuinely beautiful. Then your mother raised you well. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Victoria washing while Owen dried and stacked the plates. Through the doorway, Owen could see Carl still sitting in the parlor, watching them. The intensity of his stare made Owen's instincts prickle with warning. How long has Carl been staying here? He asked quietly. 2 months, as Dutch said. Why? Just curious. Owen did not want to alarm her with vague suspicions. He mentioned leaving soon. Yes, thank goodness. Victoria kept her voice low. He makes me uncomfortable, always watching. I will be relieved when he is gone. Owen was about to respond when a sharp knock sounded at the front door. Victoria stiffened, her hands stilling in the dishwater. Are you expecting someone? Owen asked. No. She dried her hands on her apron and walked toward the door, Owen following a few steps behind. When she opened it, a large man stood on the porch, impeccably dressed in a suit that looked wildly out of place in rawhide. His hair was slicked back with pomade, and a gold watch chain glinted across his vest. He smiled at Victoria, but there was no warmth in the expression. Good evening, Victoria. I hope I am not calling at an inconvenient time. Mr. Price. Victoria's voice had gone flat and cold. What can I do for you? I was hoping we might have another discussion about my offer to purchase your establishment. I believe we can come to mutually beneficial terms. As I have told you repeatedly, the boarding house is not for sale. Samuel Price's smile tightened. You are being unreasonable. A woman alone cannot properly run a business of this nature. It would be better for everyone if you accepted reality and my very generous offer. The answer is no, Mr. Price. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to complete. She moved to close the door, but Price put his hand against it, holding it open. Owen stepped forward, positioning himself where Price could clearly see him. The lady said no, Owen said quietly. I believe that concludes your business here. Price's eyes raked over Owen with obvious disdain. And who might you be? A guest of the boarding house, which means I have every right to be here, whereas you are currently trespassing. Trespassing? Price laughed, though anger flickered across his features. This is a public accommodation, not when the owner asks you to leave. Owen's hand did not move toward his gun, but his posture shifted slightly, and any man familiar with violence would have recognized the readiness in his stance. Price stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. From the parlor, Carl had risen and moved closer, watching the confrontation with interest but making no move to intervene. I see. Price finally removed his hand from the door. "This is not finished, Victoria. We will speak again. There is nothing more to discuss." Price turned and walked down the steps to where a fine horse waited, clearly expensive and well-bred. He mounted with practiced ease and rode off into the growing darkness without looking back. Victoria closed the door and leaned against it, her face pale. "That was foolish, Mr. Clarke." "What was?" "Preventing a man from intimidating you in your own home. You do not understand. Samuel Price is dangerous. He owns half this town, and what he does not own he controls through debts and favors. Making an enemy of him is not wise." "Then we have something in common, because I have never been particularly wise." Owen kept his tone light, trying to ease the tension in her shoulders. "But I cannot stand by and watch a man bully a woman. It goes against everything I believe." Victoria looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. This is not your fight." Owen considered his answer carefully. "Maybe I am tired of walking away from fights that matter, and maybe I think you are worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, more confession than Owen had intended. Victoria's breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might say something equally revealing. Instead, she straightened and smoothed her skirts. "I should finish cleaning the kitchen." "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Clarke." She walked away quickly, leaving Owen standing in the hallway feeling like he had just jumped off a cliff and was currently falling through empty air, uncertain whether he would land safely or crash. From the parlor, Carl spoke up. "That was quite the display of chivalry. You sweet on her already." Owen turned to face him, keeping his expression neutral. "I do not believe that is any of your business." Carl shrugged, returning to his chair and his cigar. "Fair enough. Just offering a friendly warning, Cowboy. Victoria Kennedy is bad luck for men who get too attached. Her husband died under mysterious circumstances. Her father followed not long after, and now she is all alone but refusing reasonable offers to lighten her load. Makes a man wonder. Wonder what exactly? Whether she is really as helpless as she appears, or whether she has her own ways of dealing with problems." Carl blew a smoke ring toward the ceiling. "But what do I know? I am just passing through." Owen wanted to challenge the insinuation in Carl's words, but starting a fight on his first night in the boarding house seemed counterproductive. Instead, he bid the man good night and climbed the stairs to his room, his mind churning. He did not believe for one second that Victoria was anything other than what she appeared to be, a woman trying to survive in difficult circumstances. But Carl's words revealed that there were rumors circulating about her, gossip that could damage her reputation and her business even further. That kind of poison, once released, was nearly impossible to counteract. Owen sat on his bed in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Footsteps on the stairs, doors closing, the creak of floorboards. And underneath it all, the whisper of the wind across the Montana grassland, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. He thought about his mother, who had died when he was 16, before the war had taken his father and 2 brothers. She had been a strong woman, practical and loving in equal measure, and she had taught him that true strength lay in caring for others even when it cost you something. His father had taught him to shoot and ride and track, but his mother had taught him honor. If she could see him now, what would she think? Would she approve of this sudden decision to stay in a nowhere town for a woman he had just met? Or would she tell him he was being foolish, risking himself for something that might amount to nothing? But somehow, Owen knew it was not nothing. Whatever was growing between him and Victoria, Kennedy had weight and substance, even in these first fragile hours. He had felt her pull like gravity, and fighting it seemed as pointless as fighting the sunrise. He undressed and lay down on the narrow bed, determined to get some rest before riding out to the Running Creek Ranch in the morning. But sleep eluded him for a long time, his mind full of storm-colored eyes and the memory of Victoria's breath catching when he had said she was worth fighting for. The night sounds of Rawhide filtered through his window, piano music from the saloon, the occasional shout or laugh, the whinny of horses in a distant corral. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary town, but Owen knew with the certainty of instinct that his time here would be anything but ordinary. He had spent 6 years wandering, and in one afternoon, that wandering had ended. The question now was whether he had the courage to stay, and whether Victoria would let him into her carefully guarded life. Morning came with the pale light of dawn washing across the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold. Owen woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and his stomach reminded him that trail rations and hot meals were entirely different categories of food. He dressed quickly, splashed water on his face, and headed downstairs. Victoria was already in the kitchen, moving between the stove and the dining table with practiced efficiency. She had her hair braided and pinned in a simple style, and she wore a blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes. When she saw him, something flickered across her face too quickly for him to identify before she schooled her features to polite welcome. "Good morning, Mr. Clarke. Coffee is ready and breakfast will be served shortly." "Good morning, Mrs. Kennedy, and please call me Owen. Mr. Clarke was my father. Then you must call me Victoria." She poured him coffee in a thick ceramic mug. "Dutch has already eaten and left for the ranch. Carl is still sleeping, I believe." Owen accepted the coffee gratefully, savoring the first bitter sip. "About last night, I apologize if I overstepped." "You did not." Victoria turned back to the stove, flipping bacon with swift movements. "Or rather, you did, but I am grateful nonetheless. Samuel Price has been growing bolder in his pursuit of my property, and I fear he will not stop until he has exhausted all civilized options." "What happens then?" She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then I suppose we will discover what he is truly capable of." The words chilled Owen more than he wanted to admit. He had seen too much of what men were capable of when they decided the law did not apply to them. The war had been full of such men, and the West seemed to breed them like weeds. "Victoria, you should not have to face that alone." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears that she blinked back fiercely. "But I am alone, Owen. That is the simple truth. My parents are dead, my husband is dead, I have no siblings, no extended family to call upon. The people of this town are kind enough in passing, but no one wants to make an enemy of Samuel Price for my sake. I understand that. I do not blame them. Not everyone feels that way. You have been here less than a day. You do not know what you are offering." Owen set down his coffee and stood, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "Maybe not. But I know what I am feeling, and I know I did not ride into Rawhide by chance yesterday. There are 100 towns in Montana Territory. I could have stopped at any of them. But I stopped here and I saw you, and something in me recognized something in you." Victoria stared at him, her chest rising and falling with quickened breath. "You do not know me. Then let me. Let me stay and get to know you. Let me help you." "Why?" The word came out almost pleading. "Why would you append your life for a stranger?" Owen considered how to explain something he barely understood himself. 6 years ago, my whole family died in the war. My father and brothers killed in battle, my mother from illness while I was away fighting. When I came home, there was nothing left but graves and memories. So I left, and I have been moving ever since because staying anywhere reminded me of everything I had lost." He paused, searching for the right words. "But yesterday, when I saw you, something changed. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like maybe I could stop running. Maybe I could put down roots again without being terrified that everything would be ripped away. I cannot explain it better than that. Victoria's hand had come up to press against her chest, over her heart. I am not a solution to your grief, Owen. I know that, and I am not looking for you to fix what is broken in me, but maybe two broken people can build something stronger together than either could alone. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Victoria turned back to the stove, removing the bacon before it could burn. "Eat your breakfast," she said softly. "You have a long ride to the ranch." It was not acceptance, but it was not rejection either. Owen took his seat at the table and ate the meal she set before him. Bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and more of that excellent bread with butter and jam. They did not speak further, but the silence felt companionable rather than awkward. After breakfast, Owen saddled Copper and prepared to ride out to the Running Creek Ranch. Victoria came to see him off, standing on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the morning. "Be careful," she said. "The range tensions Dutch mentioned are real. Men have been killed over grazing disputes. I will be careful." Owen swung into the saddle, looking down at her. "I will be back for supper." "I will count on it." The ride to the Running Creek Ranch took him through some of the most beautiful country Owen had seen in his travels. Rolling grassland stretched in all directions, broken by stands of cottonwood and willow along the creek that gave the ranch its name. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. The mountains rose to the west, their peaks still holding snow despite the September warmth. Owen found Marcus Thornton near the main barn, working with a young horse in a round pen. The rancher was a man in his early 40s, lean and weathered with intelligent eyes that assessed Owen thoroughly before he spoke. "You must be the fellow Dutch mentioned might be coming by. Owen Clarke." "Yes, sir. I am looking for work. Dutch said you might be hiring." "I might, if you know cattle and can handle trouble. We have been having problems with sheep ranchers cutting our fences and driving their flocks onto our range. Lost 6 head last month to what looked like poisoning, though I cannot prove it." Owen dismounted and extended his hand. "I know cattle, worked several drives up from Texas, and I can handle myself in a fight if it comes to that, though I would prefer it did not." Thornton shook his hand firmly. "I like your honesty. Too many men come through here looking to prove how tough they are, usually end up getting themselves or someone else killed." He gestured toward the horse he had been working. "You know anything about breaking horses?" "Some. My father bred horses before the war. Show me." For the next hour, Owen worked with the young gelding, demonstrating a patient approach that relied on building trust rather than breaking spirit. Thornton watched without comment, occasionally asking questions about Owen's technique. By the time they finished, the horse was accepting a saddle blanket without panic, and Thornton was nodding approval. "You will do. $30 a month plus room and board in the bunkhouse, or you can take $25 if you want to stay in town." "I would prefer to stay in town if that works for you." Thornton's expression suggested he understood exactly why Owen was making that choice. "Heard you are staying at the Kennedy boarding house. Victoria is good people. Had a rough time of it lately." "So I gather." "Samuel Price has been sniffing around her property like a dog after a bone. Man is trouble, and he has enough money and connections to be dangerous." Thornton fixed Owen with a hard stare. "If you are looking to be a hero, think carefully. Price does not fight fair, and he has resources most cowboys could not match. I appreciate the warning, but I am not looking to be a hero, just doing what seems right." Thornton studied him for another moment, then nodded. "All right then. Start tomorrow dawn. We will be moving the herd to winter pasture over the next few weeks, and I need men I can trust to watch for trouble." Owen thanked him and rode back toward Rawhide, arriving in early afternoon. The town was quiet, most people indoors during the heat of the day. He stabled Copper and walked toward the boarding house, but before he reached it, a voice called out from the saloon porch. "You there? Clarke, is it?" Owen turned to find Samuel Price standing with two other men, both armed and both wearing expressions that suggested they enjoyed their work a bit too much. "Mr. Price, I understand you have taken employment with Marcus Thornton. Interesting choice. A man needs to work." Price descended the steps, his companions flanking him. "Indeed, but I wonder if Thornton mentioned the difficulties his ranch has been experiencing. Unfortunate accidents, missing cattle, that sort of thing. A dangerous place for a new hire." Owen kept his stance relaxed but ready. "Every job has its risks. I am not concerned. Perhaps you should be." Price moved closer, invading Owen's personal space in a calculated intimidation tactic. "This is a small town, Mr. Clarke. People here understand how things work, who to respect and who to cross. You would do well to learn those lessons quickly. I will keep that in mind. And another thing." Price lowered his voice, though his men could certainly still hear. "Stay away from Victoria Kennedy. That woman has caused enough trouble. She needs to accept reality and sell that boarding house before something unfortunate happens." Every muscle in Owen's body tensed, but he kept his voice level. "Are you threatening her? I am simply stating facts. Buildings catch fire. Accidents happen. It would be a shame if a stubborn woman lost everything because she refused reasonable help." Owen stepped forward until he and Price were nearly nose to nose. "If anything happens to Victoria or her property, I will know who to hold responsible, and that would be unfortunate for everyone involved." Price smiled coldly. "Big words from a drifter with no connections and no future. Do not make threats you cannot back up, Cowboy. It is not a threat. It is a promise." For a moment, Owen thought Price might escalate the confrontation into actual violence. The two men with him had positioned themselves with clear access to their weapons, and the street was empty enough that no witnesses would contradict whatever story they chose to tell. But then Price laughed and stepped back. "You have spirit, I will grant you that. Foolish, but spirited. We will see how long that lasts." He turned and walked back into the saloon, his men following. Owen remained on the street for a few moments, letting his heart rate settle before continuing to the boarding house. Victoria was hanging laundry behind the building when he arrived, white sheets snapping in the breeze. She looked up at his approach, and her expression shifted from calm to concerned. "What happened? What makes you think something happened? Your face. You look like you want to hit someone." Owen helped her hang the remaining sheets, using the physical activity to burn off his lingering anger. "I had a conversation with Samuel Price. He made his position regarding you and your property very clear." Victoria's hand stilled on the clothesline. "What did he say?" Owen repeated the conversation, watching her face grow pale. When he finished, she sank down onto the back steps, her hands trembling. "This is escalating faster than I expected. I thought I had more time." "Time for what?" "To figure out what to do. To find a way to protect myself and my home." She looked up at him, desperation clear in her eyes. "I cannot sell, Owen. This boarding house is all I have. It is my livelihood, my home, my connection to my parents. If I lose it, I have nothing." Owen sat beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You are not going to lose it. You cannot know that, maybe not. But I can make it a lot harder for Price to take it from you." Victoria turned to face him fully. "I cannot ask you to do that. You just arrived here. This is not your responsibility. You are not asking, I am offering." "There is a difference." She searched his face, and whatever she found there seemed to convince her that he was serious. "Why, Owen, I still do not understand why you care so much about what happens to me." Owen took a breath, preparing to speak a truth that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Because from the moment I saw you yesterday, struggling with that crate and refusing to ask for help, something in my heart knew you. I cannot explain it any better than that. It was like recognizing someone I had been looking for without knowing I was looking. Does that sound completely insane?" "Yes," Victoria whispered. "But I felt it too." The admission hung between them, more intimate than a touch. Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were cool despite the warm day, and they trembled slightly. "I know it is too soon," he said quietly. "I know we barely know each other in any practical sense, but I also know that what I feel is real and it is worth fighting for, if you will let me." Victoria's eyes filled with tears that spilled over onto her cheeks. "I am afraid. Everyone I have loved has been taken from me. My parents, my husband. I cannot bear to lose someone else. You cannot live your whole life afraid of loss. That is not living at all." Owen reached up with his free hand and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Let me stay. Let me get to know you properly, and let yourself get to know me. If this feeling between us is real, it will grow stronger. And if it is not, well, at least you will have help dealing with Samuel Price." A watery laugh escaped her. "That is a rather unromantic way to put it." "I am a cowboy, not a poet." Victoria squeezed his hand and her tears slowed. "All right, stay, help me if you wish, but Owen, please be careful. I could not bear it if you were hurt because of me." "I am always careful," he smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, reasonably careful most of the time." They sat together on the steps as the afternoon stretched toward evening, talking more freely now that the barriers between them had begun to crumble. Victoria told him about her childhood in Ohio, how her parents had moved west seeking opportunity when she was 15. She had met her husband, James Kennedy, in Rawhide when she was 18. He had been a freight hauler, transporting goods between towns and settlements. "He was killed by bandits 3 years ago, ambushed on the road to Helena," she said, her voice flat with old grief. "They never caught the men who did it. And my father, he never recovered from the loss. He and James had been close. When father died last winter, everyone said it was pneumonia, but I think it was really a broken heart." "I am sorry. That is an unfair amount of loss for anyone to bear." Victoria nodded. "Some days I wonder why I keep fighting. It would be easier to sell everything and leave, start fresh somewhere nobody knows my history. But you do not want easy. You want to honor the people you loved by protecting what they built." "Yes." She looked at him with something like wonder. "How did you know that?" "Because I understand it. Because if I had a home left to fight for, I would do the same." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Owen told her about some of the places he had been, the odd jobs he had worked, the people he had met. He made her laugh with a story about a cattle drive where the cook had accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the dessert, and the near riot that had ensued. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Owen felt like he had known Victoria for years rather than a single day. There was an ease between them that should have taken months to develop, a comfort that felt like coming home. Carl appeared as they were setting the table for supper, his bags packed and tied. "I will be leaving after the meal," he announced. "Got a stage to catch." "Safe travels," Victoria said politely. The meal passed with minimal conversation. Carl seemed preoccupied, casting odd glances at Owen and Victoria throughout. When he finally left, Victoria visibly relaxed. "I apologize for saying this about a guest, but I am glad to see him go. There was something off about that man." Owen agreed but said nothing. The evening felt too pleasant to spoil with speculation about Carl's character. After cleaning up the kitchen together, Victoria sat down at the piano and began to play. Owen recognized the melody as a hymn, though he could not name it. Her playing was skilled but unpracticed, as though she had learned well and then rarely had time to exercise the skill. "My mother taught me," she said, noticing his attention. "She insisted every young lady should know music. I am grateful for it now. Playing helps me think. It is beautiful." "You are beautiful when you play." The words had slipped out before Owen could censor them, but he did not regret their truth. Victoria's hand stilled on the keys and a flush colored her cheeks. "You should not say such things." "Why not if they are true?" She turned on the piano bench to face him. "Because we agreed to take this slowly, to get to know each other properly. I am getting to know you. I am learning that you play piano and that you blush when complimented and that you are even more beautiful when you blush." Victoria laughed despite herself. "You are impossible. I have been called worse." She stood and crossed to where he sat, surprising him. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and Owen felt the pull between them like a physical force. "I should go to bed," Victoria said softly. "It has been a long day." "Victoria, wait." Owen stood as well. "Thank you for giving me a chance, for letting me stay. Thank you for wanting to." She left the parlor quickly, and Owen heard her footsteps on the stairs. He remained standing for a long moment, his heart pounding with a mixture of exhilaration and terror. He had committed himself to something that could end in heartbreak or violence or both. But for the first time in 6 years, he felt truly alive. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Owen worked at the Running Creek Ranch during the day, helping to move cattle and repair fences and watch for signs of sabotage. The work was hard but satisfying, and Marcus Thornton proved to be a fair employer who valued competence over bravado. Dutch Miller became something of a friend, sharing meals at the boarding house and teaching Owen the particular challenges of Montana ranching. "The winters here were brutal," Dutch explained, "and cattle that survived Texas heat sometimes could not handle Montana cold. The sheep versus cattle conflict was real and growing more violent. The sheep eat the grass down to nothing," Dutch said one evening over supper. "Or so the cattle ranchers claim. The sheep ranchers say there is plenty of range for everyone if folks would just share. Honestly, I think there is truth on both sides, but nobody wants to compromise." "Has there been more trouble lately?" Owen asked. "Some. Found another fence cut last week, and somebody shot at one of our riders, though they missed. Sheriff Brennan came out to investigate but did not find much." Owen had met Sheriff Tom Brennan briefly in town. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed overwhelmed by the territory he was supposed to patrol. Good-hearted, Owen judged, but stretched too thin to be effective. During the evenings, Owen and Victoria spent increasing amounts of time together. They would sit in the parlor after supper, talking or reading or simply enjoying companionable silence. Victoria continued to play piano, and Owen discovered she had a lovely singing voice when she thought no one was listening closely. On Sundays, when Owen did not work, they attended church together. The building with the crooked steeple housed a congregation of about 30 people, presided over by a circuit preacher who rotated between several towns. The sermons were earnest if not eloquent, and afterward people would gather outside to exchange news and gossip. Owen noticed that while people were polite to Victoria, few went out of their way to engage with her. There was a distance, a wall of reservation that hurt her even though she tried not to show it. He suspected the rumors Carl had mentioned were spreading, poisoning her reputation through insinuation rather than direct accusation. Samuel Price attended church as well, sitting in the front row and making a show of his piety. He would smile at Victoria with false warmth, and Owen had to consciously relax his hands to keep from making fists. After one such service, as they walked back to the boarding house, Victoria finally addressed the elephant between them. "People are talking about us, you know, about you living at the boarding house, about us spending time together. Let them talk. It is damaging my reputation further. A widow should maintain propriety, not entertain a single man in her home." Owen stopped walking and turned to face her. "Then marry me." Victoria stared at him, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "What? Marry me?" Owen repeated, his heart hammering but his voice steady. "I know it is fast. I know people will say we barely know each other. But I know enough. I know you are strong and kind and brave. I know you make me want to stay in one place for the first time in 6 years. I know I think about you first thing every morning and last thing every night. Marry me and give the gossips nothing to talk about except how lucky we both are. Owen, that is." Victoria pressed her hands to her face. "That is the worst proposal I have ever heard." His heart sank. "I apologize. I should not have presumed. I did not say no." She lowered her hands and her eyes were shining. "I said it was the worst proposal because it was completely unromantic and impulsive, and you did it in the middle of the street where anyone could see. So that is a yes. That is a maybe. Ask me again when you have thought about it for more than 5 seconds." But she was smiling as she said it, and Owen felt hope unfurl in his chest like a flower opening to sunlight. Over the next week, Owen planned properly. He bought a ring from the mercantile, a simple gold band that cost him most of his first month's wages. He asked Marcus Thornton for permission to host a dinner at the ranch, and the rancher agreed with a knowing smile. On Saturday evening, Owen took Victoria out to the Running Creek Ranch. He had asked Dutch to help him prepare a meal, and together they had managed to cook a decent beef roast with vegetables. Owen had picked wildflowers from the rangeland and arranged them in a jar on the table. Victoria looked around the small line cabin where Owen had set up the dinner, her expression soft. "You did all this, with some help from Dutch. I wanted to do this properly." Owen pulled out a chair for her. "Please sit." They ate slowly, talking and laughing. Owen told her stories from his youth in Illinois, before the war had consumed everything. Victoria shared more about her marriage to James, the good times and the difficult ones, painting a picture of a relationship that had been comfortable if not passionate. "I loved him," she said. But it was a quiet love, built on shared goals and mutual respect rather than grand passion. "I was young when we married, and I thought that was how love was supposed to be." "And now?" Owen asked. Victoria looked at him across the candlelight. "Now I wonder if I was wrong." After the meal, Owen led her outside where the Montana sky spread above them in an endless tapestry of stars. The Milky Way blazed across the darkness, and the air smelled of sage and night-blooming flowers. "Victoria Kennedy," Owen said, taking her hands in his. "I know I am just a cowboy with more past than future. I know I cannot offer you wealth or status or security beyond what I can build with these 2 hands. But I can offer you my heart, completely and without reservation. I can offer you a partner who will stand beside you through whatever comes. I can offer you love that burns bright enough to light up the darkness." He knelt down on one knee, pulling out the ring. "Will you marry me?" Victoria was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face in the starlight. "Yes, yes, Owen, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he stood, she threw her arms around him and kissed him. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like salt and joy and promise. Owen wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close, feeling her heart beating against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, Both breathless, Victoria laughed through her tears. "We are completely insane, you know that. We have known each other for less than a month. Sometimes a month is long enough to know everything that matters." They returned to Rawhide late that evening, both giddy with plans and possibilities. They would be married as soon as the circuit preacher returned in 3 weeks' time. It would be a simple ceremony in the church, with whoever wished to attend. Dutch was the first person they told, and he whooped with joy and insisted on buying drinks at the saloon to celebrate. Several of the other ranch hands joined them, toasting the couple's health and happiness. Owen noticed that Samuel Price was present, watching from a corner table with an expression that made Owen's instincts scream warnings. But tonight was for celebration, not worry. Owen held Victoria's hand and accepted congratulations from people who were slowly becoming neighbors rather than strangers. The town of Rawhide was beginning to feel like home. The feeling lasted until they returned to the boarding house and found the front door standing open. "Wait here," Owen said, his hand moving to his gun, but Victoria was already pushing past him into the house. "This is my home. I will not wait outside like a frightened child." They entered together, Owen slightly ahead and ready for trouble. The parlor had been ransacked, furniture overturned, books thrown from their shelves. The kitchen was similarly destroyed, dishes smashed, food stores emptied onto the floor. Upstairs, Owen's room and the other guest rooms had been torn apart as well. But the worst damage was in Victoria's private room. Someone had taken a knife to her clothing, shredding dresses and undergarments. The mattress had been slashed open, feathers everywhere. And on the wall above her bed, someone had written in black paint, "Sell or burn." Victoria stood in the doorway, shaking. Owen wanted to comfort her, but he needed to make sure no one was still in the house first. He checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They were alone with the destruction. Only then did he return to Victoria's room and pull her into his arms. She was rigid at first, holding herself together through sheer will, but then she collapsed against him and sobbed. "They destroyed everything, everything. We will fix it. We will make it right again." "You cannot fix this, Owen. They can come back anytime. They have made it clear they can reach me whenever they want." Owen held her tighter. "Then we make sure they understand the consequences of trying again." "How? By fighting them. By matching violence with violence. I do not want that. I do not want blood spilled over a building. This is not just about a building anymore, Victoria. This is about someone trying to terrorize you into submission, and I will not allow that." They spent the night cleaning up what they could. Dutch returned from the saloon and helped, his weathered face drawn with anger. By dawn, the worst of the destruction had been cleared away, though the slashed mattress and the threatening message remained as evidence. Sheriff Brennan came by after breakfast, took notes, and looked grimly apologetic. "I will investigate, but without witnesses or evidence there is not much I can do. Could have been anyone." "It was Samuel Price," Victoria said flatly. "Everyone knows it." "Knowing and proving are different things, Mrs. Kennedy. I cannot arrest a man based on suspicion." After the sheriff left, Owen made a decision. "I am going to confront Price. That is exactly what he wants. He wants you to do something reckless so he can claim self-defense when he has you killed. Then I will be careful not to give him that opportunity." Victoria grabbed his arm. "Owen, please, do not do this. Not when we just got engaged. Not when we finally have something to look forward to." He covered her hand with his. "I have to. If I do not stand up to him now, he will never stop. Men like Price only understand one language. Then let me come with you." "Absolutely not. It is my fight more than yours. Which is exactly why I need to handle it. Victoria, trust me. I am not going to do anything stupid. I just need to make certain things clear." He found Samuel Price at the land office, going over property documents with the clerk. Price looked up as Owen entered and smiled that cold smile. "Mr. Clarke, come to reconsider your position." "I came to deliver a message. Stay away from Victoria and her property. What happened last night was the last time you will terrorize her." "I have no idea what you are talking about. I was at the saloon all evening. Dozens of witnesses can confirm it. You did not have to be there yourself." "We both know you have men who do your dirty work." Price set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Be very careful about making accusations you cannot prove, Cowboy. Slander is a serious offense." Owen stepped closer, keeping his voice low so the nervous clerk could not hear. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave Victoria alone. You are going to stop pressuring her to sell. And you are going to make it known that she is under protection, so your hired thugs understand the situation has changed." "And why would I do any of that?" "Because if anything else happens to her or her property, I will make it my life's work to destroy you. I have nothing to lose, Price. I am just a cowboy with a gun and a sense of justice. I do not care about your money or your connections. I will be the worst nightmare you ever had." Price's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "I am promising you. There is a difference." Owen straightened. "Think about it carefully. Ask yourself if Victoria's property is really worth what it will cost you to take it." He left before Price could respond, his heart pounding but his head clear. He had drawn a line in the sand, and now everything depended on whether Price would respect it or try to cross it. The answer came 2 days later, when Owen arrived at the Running Creek Ranch to find Marcus Thornton's barn on fire. The ranch hands were fighting the blaze with buckets of water, but the building was already mostly consumed. The horses had been saved, thank God, but equipment and hay stores were lost. As Owen joined the bucket line, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A sheep's carcass nailed to what remained of the barn door, with a note pinned to it reading, "Cattle killers get what they deserve." After the fire was finally extinguished, Thornton gathered his men. "This has gone too far. Someone is trying to start an all-out war between the cattle and sheep ranchers, and I will not be manipulated into it." "You think the sheep ranchers did this?" Dutch asked. "I think someone wants me to think that, but I talked to John Morrison at the Big Sky Sheep Ranch last week. He is as concerned about the escalating tensions as I am. Neither of us wants violence." "Then who?" another ranch hand asked. Owen spoke up. "Someone who benefits from chaos and conflict. Someone who might want ranchers so distracted they do not notice other schemes." Thornton looked at him sharply. "You are thinking Samuel Price." "I cannot prove it, but it fits. He has been trying to consolidate property in Rawhide. If ranchers are fighting each other, they are not paying attention to their business interests in town." "That is a serious accusation, I know, and I wish I had more than suspicion to back it up." Over the next week, more incidents occurred, fences cut on both cattle and sheep ranges. A shepherd beaten on the road to town. Threatening notes left at various properties. The tension in the territory was reaching a breaking point. Sheriff Brennan tried to keep the peace, but he was one man against a rising tide of anger. At the general store, Owen heard men talking openly about forming vigilante groups to protect their interests. The talk was dangerous, the kind that led to lynchings and massacres. Through it all, Owen and Victoria continued their wedding preparations, though the joy of their engagement was tainted by the constant threat hanging over them. Victoria insisted on repairing the boarding house herself, refusing to let vandalism drive her from her home. Owen helped her every evening after work, and slowly the damage was erased. 3 days before the wedding, Marcus Thornton called Owen into his office. I have been doing some investigating, the rancher said. Asking questions, following up on rumors, and I found something interesting. He pulled out a series of land deed documents. These are all properties in Rawhide and the surrounding area that have changed hands in the past 2 years. Most of them sold well below market value, and all of them sold to Samuel Price or his associates. Owen studied the documents. Forced sales. In many cases, yes. Properties damaged by fire or theft, owners pressured to sell and leave. And here is the most interesting part. Thornton pointed to one particular deed. This is the property where the Big Sky Sheep Ranch runs their summer grazing. Except it is not actually owned by John Morrison anymore. He sold it 6 months ago after someone burned his barn and killed 20 of his sheep. Let me guess. Samuel Price bought it. Through a shell company, but yes, which means Price now owns land that both sheep and cattle ranchers use. He could play them against each other forever, profiting from the conflict while slowly buying up everything around them. Owen felt pieces clicking into place. He is creating the range war to serve his own interests. That is my theory, but proving it is another matter. What if we could get him to confess? Thornton raised an eyebrow. How? Owen thought about it. By making him think he has won, by giving him what he wants or appearing to. Over the next day, Owen and Thornton developed a plan. It was risky and required several things to go right, but it was the best chance they had to expose Price and end the escalating violence. The first step was for Victoria to approach Price with an offer to sell the boarding house. Owen hated asking her to do it, knowing how much it would cost her pride to appear to surrender. But she agreed, understanding what was at stake. If this ends the threat not just to me but to everyone else he is manipulating, it is worth it, she said. She went to Price's office alone, and Owen waited outside, every muscle tense. The meeting lasted half an hour, and when Victoria emerged, her face was pale but composed. He is meeting me tomorrow night at the boarding house to finalize the sale, she said. He wants to pay in cash and have me sign over the deed immediately. Did he seem suspicious? No, I think he believes he has finally broken me. Her voice wavered slightly. He was gloating, Owen. Telling me how this was inevitable, how I should have accepted his offer months ago and saved myself all the trouble. Owen pulled her into his arms, not caring who might see. Tomorrow night this will all be over. I promise. The next evening, Owen and Sheriff Brennan hid in Victoria's private room while she waited downstairs for Price to arrive. The plan was simple. Victoria would engage Price in conversation about why he wanted her property so badly, and hopefully he would incriminate himself enough for the sheriff to act. Price arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather satchel that presumably held the cash. Through the crack in the door, Owen watched him hand the satchel to Victoria. "Count it if you like," Price said magnanimously. $2,500 as agreed. That is half what this property is worth. It is what we agreed upon. And given your recent troubles, I would say it is quite generous. Victoria set the satchel aside without opening it. Before I sign, I want to understand something. Why does my boarding house matter so much to you? This is not prime commercial property. What is so important about this specific building? Price smiled. You are perceptive. I will grant you that. Very well, since you will be leaving town anyway, I suppose there is no harm in satisfying your curiosity. Owen held his breath, willing Price to keep talking. Your property sits on the only natural spring within 5 miles, Price continued. As this town grows, water rights will become increasingly valuable. More importantly, the land directly behind your property is where the railroad is planning to build their station when the line extends through here next year. Railroad, Victoria's surprise was genuine. I had not heard anything about that, because it has not been announced yet. But I have connections with the railroad company. I know their plans, and I know that property values along the proposed line are going to increase 100-fold. Price chuckled. Your father sold the land behind this building to me 5 years ago, before he understood its value. Once I own your property as well, I will control the entire railroad right-of-way through Rawhide. I will be able to name my price. And the range war? Victoria asked, her voice steady despite what Owen knew was racing fear. The conflict between the sheep and cattle ranchers. Did you engineer that as well? Price's expression hardened. You are asking dangerous questions, Mrs. Kennedy. I am simply trying to understand how far your manipulations extend. Whether the barn fires and fence cutting and threats were all part of your plan to distract people while you consolidated power. You are cleverer than I gave you credit for. Price moved closer to her, and Owen tensed. Yes, I hired men to stir up trouble between the ranchers. Foolish, prideful men are easy to manipulate. A few incidents blamed on the other side, and they do the rest themselves. While they fight over grass and water, I buy their properties for pennies on the dollar when they need cash to rebuild or relocate. That is monstrous. People have been hurt. Killed. That is business. The weak fall, the strong prosper, and I am very strong. Not as strong as you think, Sheriff Brennan said, emerging from the bedroom with his gun drawn. Owen followed, covering Price from the other side. Price's face went through a remarkable transformation, from smug confidence to rage to calculation. You have no proof. This was a private conversation. Hearsay evidence is not admissible in court. It is when I witnessed it, Brennan said. And when we have corroborating evidence from the men you hired to cause trouble. Turns out criminals talk quite freely when facing jail time themselves. Who? Price demanded. Carl Hansen, for one. We caught up with him in Virginia City. He was very helpful once we explained that cooperating might reduce his sentence for arson and vandalism. So Carl had been one of Price's men. Owen thought about the night he had seen Carl watching them, the comments about Victoria being bad luck. He had been spying for Price, reporting on her activities and vulnerabilities. Price's hand moved toward his jacket, and Owen reacted instantly. Do not even think about it. Keep your hands where we can see them. For a moment, Owen thought Price would try something foolish. Then the man raised his hands slowly. My lawyers will have me out in a day. Maybe, Brennan agreed, but everyone in town is going to know what you have been doing, and I suspect your business partners will be less than pleased when they discover how you have been manipulating them. As Brennan arrested Price and led him away, Victoria sagged with relief. Owen caught her and held her up, feeling her trembling. It is over, he murmured. You are safe now. I cannot believe it worked. I was so terrified he would realize it was a trap. You were incredible, so brave. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. We can really get married now, without all this hanging over us. We can really get married. Day after tomorrow, just like we planned. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in early October, with golden aspen leaves falling like blessings around the crooked church. Word had spread about Victoria and Owen's role in exposing Samuel Price, and the townspeople turned out in force to support them. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that made her eyes luminous, and she carried wildflowers that Owen had picked that morning. Owen wore his best clothes, which were not particularly fine, but Victoria looked at him like he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. Marcus Thornton stood as Owen's best man, and Dutch gave Victoria away since she had no family. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking about love and commitment and the courage it took to build a life together. When Owen slipped the ring on Victoria's finger, his hand was shaking. When she said, "I do," her voice rang clear and certain through the church. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of the past turbulent month. The reception was held at the boarding house, which now officially belonged to both of them. The townspeople brought food and drink, and someone produced a fiddle. Dancing spilled out into the street as the afternoon turned to evening. During a quiet moment, Victoria pulled Owen aside. "I cannot believe this is real, that I am married to you, that we survived everything that tried to tear us apart. Believe it, because I am not going anywhere. My wandering days are over. What made you so certain, about me, about us?" Owen thought about that first moment, seeing her struggling with the crate, feeling that inexplicable pull. "I think some part of my soul recognized its home, and after 6 years of running from ghosts, I was finally ready to stop and build something new. I love you, Owen Clarke." "I love you, Victoria Clarke." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become family. Owen thought about how he had ridden into Rawhide expecting to pass through, and instead had found everything he had been searching for without knowing he was searching. The months that followed were busy ones. The trial of Samuel Price revealed the full extent of his manipulations, and several other men were implicated in his schemes. Price was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and his properties were liquidated to compensate those he had defrauded. The railroad did come through Rawhide, just as Price had predicted, and property values did increase. But now that increase benefited the honest landowners who had held onto their properties despite pressure. Owen continued working for Marcus Thornton, but also took on the management of the boarding house alongside Victoria. They made improvements, adding rooms and modernizing the kitchen. Word spread that the establishment was well run and respectable, and business increased steadily. The range war fizzled out once people understood they had been manipulated. The sheep and cattle ranchers never became close friends, but they negotiated grazing agreements that allowed both industries to coexist. Sheriff Brennan's reputation improved once he had actual resources to investigate crimes properly. But the best part of those months was simply being married to Victoria. Learning her habits and quirks, discovering that she sang off-key when she thought no one was listening, finding out that she was ticklish behind her knees, falling asleep beside her every night and waking up to find her still there every morning. By spring, Victoria was pregnant. The news filled Owen with joy and terror in equal measure. He had lost so much in his life that the thought of having something so precious to protect felt overwhelming. "What if something happens?" he asked her one night, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I cannot keep you both safe? What if everything turns out perfectly?" Victoria countered. "What if our child grows up surrounded by love and safety and possibility? You cannot live in fear of loss, Owen. You taught me that." Their son was born in November of 1878, during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and Owen paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal while the midwife worked. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he sank to his knees in relief. They named him James Patrick Clarke, after Victoria's first husband and Owen's father. When Owen held his son for the first time, looking down at the tiny red face and seeing his own features mixed with Victoria's, he wept. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I do not deserve either of you." "Hush," Victoria said, exhausted but radiant. "You deserve all the happiness in the world. We both do." Little James was a calm baby, easy to soothe and quick to smile. Owen discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed. spending hours simply watching his son sleep or playing nonsense games that made the baby laugh. Victoria glowed with motherhood, fierce and gentle in turns. The boarding house thrived under their joint management. They hired a young woman named Sarah Mitchell to help with cooking and cleaning, which gave Victoria more time to rest after the birth. Dutch Miller became something like an honorary uncle to James, teaching him silly songs and carving him wooden toys. 2 years later, Victoria gave birth to their daughter, Ellen Rose Clarke. She had Owen's dark hair and Victoria's storm-colored eyes, and she was trouble from her first breath. Where James had been calm, Ellen was tempestuous. She learned to walk early and immediately used her newfound mobility to get into everything possible. "This is your fault," Victoria told Owen, laughing as she pulled Ellen away from the stove for the third time that morning. "She has your stubborn streak." "My stubborn streak." I seem to recall a certain woman who refused to give up her boarding house despite overwhelming pressure. That was principle, not stubbornness. "What is the difference?" Victoria threw a dish towel at him, and Ellen shrieked with delight at the game. The years passed in a blur of ordinary miracles. James started school and proved to be an excellent student, inheriting his mother's intelligence and his father's quiet determination. Ellen was wild and creative, always drawing or making up stories or organizing elaborate games with the neighborhood children. Owen continued to work with horses, eventually starting his own breeding program on a small property they purchased outside town. The Montana Territory became a state in 1889, and Rawhide slowly transformed from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and civic organizations. Through it all, Owen and Victoria's love deepened and matured. The passionate urgency of their early days mellowed into something richer and more complex. They had their disagreements, of course, but they had learned to fight fair and forgive quickly. They maintained the habit of sitting together in the parlor after the children were in bed, talking or reading or simply enjoying companionable silence. One evening in the spring of 1890, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Victoria reached over and took Owen's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping here instead of continuing north all those years ago?" Owen raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Not for one single second. That day I rode into Rawhide was the day my life truly began. Mine, too. I was so lost before you came. So alone. We found each other. Against all odds, in the middle of nowhere, Montana, we found each other." "Do you think that means something? That we were meant to be?" Owen considered. "I think we made choices that led us to each other. You chose to keep fighting for your home. I chose to stop and help a stranger. We chose each other every day after that. Maybe that is more meaningful than fate or destiny. We built this life together, deliberately, one choice at a time." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love our life. I love our family. I love you, Owen Clarke, more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Promise, promise." From inside the house, they heard Ellen shriek with laughter and James yelling at her to stop whatever mischief she was causing. Owen and Victoria looked at each other and smiled. "Should we intervene?" Victoria asked. "Probably. In a minute." They sat a moment longer, hand in hand, watching the day fade into night. The boarding house behind them glowed with lamplight, full of warmth and life and love. The town of Rawhide stretched out before them, no longer just a stopping point but a true home. Owen thought about the man he had been 13 years ago, hollow and drifting, convinced he would never find a place to belong. And he thought about the moment he had seen Victoria for the first time, struggling with that heavy crate, and how something in his soul had simply known. His wandering had ended that day, though he had not fully understood it at the time. But understanding had come, day by day and choice by choice, until the life he had built with Victoria felt as natural as breathing. The children's voices rose in another bout of chaos from inside the house. Victoria sighed and started to rise, but Owen pulled her back for one more kiss. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too. Now come help me separate our children before Ellen convinces James to do something that results in property damage." They walked into the house together, into the beautiful chaos of their life, and Owen felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. He had everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dreamed possible. The cowboy had seen her and understood his wandering had ended. And in that understanding, in that choice to stay, he had found not just love but home, not just a wife but a partner, not just a stopping point but a destination worth reaching. The story of Owen and Victoria Clarke would be told in Rawhide for generations. Young lovers would point to them as proof that true love existed, that two people could find each other against all odds and build something lasting. And the boarding house would stand for decades, a testament to courage and stubbornness and the power of choosing to stay. But for Owen and Victoria themselves, their story was simply their life. The life they had fought for, built together, and cherished with every breath. And as they went to bed that night, children finally settled and house quiet, they held each other close and gave thanks for the day that had changed everything. The day a cowboy rode into a small Montana town, saw a woman who needed help, and understood in that moment that his long journey was finally over. He had found his home in her eyes, his future in her courage, his heart's desire in her smile. And they had lived, truly lived, happily ever after.